whenever. Can I load this into my account?
Your ID?
Okay.
Okay, you'll be in the Paris Black, table 18.
Let's
7.
go Paris Black.
Have a good one.
Thank you so much. It's gonna be 10-handed tomorrow. It's gonna suck. Locked in. I finally got the chance to buy in. The nerves are starting to set in. This isn't my first rodeo with the World Series of Poker main event. Man, doesn't it still feel super special. As I sit here having dinner, I just regged. I started thinking how we all do this thing. It's like a mecca, the pilgrimage of coming to play the World Series of Poker. And for a lot of us, it honestly comes down to the last tournament. Oddly enough, the main event is not the last tournament. It feels like it's the last tournament. We all come with this mind frame that we're owed all of our run bet. We want to cash in for this tournament. And just so that the poker gods are clear, I'm looking to do just that. All the run bet to this point, I'm cashing in my one time, preemptively. Hopefully it works out for me. World Series of Poker main event. $10,000 for an opportunity at winning somewhere in the millions. The next day comes, and it's hard to sleep the night before. My emotions are running. I'm not sure how to react to all this, but the one thing that keeps me calm is meditation. Something that I did end up picking up more often than not during this World Series of Poker was the ability to sit down, to lock out the outside world, and do my best to focus on myself and my craft. Although I can't consider myself to be some kind of a professional, what I can consider myself to be is somebody that can try to reach the state of Zen. Poker is such an emotional game. The emotional warfare that happens right in front of you. World Series of Poker main event is going to test every single ability you have as a poker player. You're going to have to make big folds consistently, big calls consistently, and your patience will be tested more than any other facet in your life, outside of probably parenthood. Day one is here, and I'm going in with the attitude that this is a marathon and not a race. A chip at a time, a level at a time. 2 hours, level 1 starts now. Ladies and gentlemen, the wait is finally over. What we've been waiting for over years since our last time around, the day has come. My opportunity to play the biggest tournament I possibly can afford is here today. We're opening things off here in the second level, if I'm not mistaken, of the World Series of Poker. The level is going to be 300, 300, 200. That 300 is going to be qualifying as a big blind ante. My starting stack sits right around 60,000 chips. In this next hand, I look down at pocket fours. This is Ethan's favorite hand, so seems like it'll be just good enough for me. I'm in the cutoff and I raise it up to 700. Only the big blind calls, and we're going off to a flop, and hopefully this is a side of things to come as we end up with bottom set. One thing that everyone knows is when you make bottom set, there's not a whole lot of reason to slow play. There's a flush draw out there and so many straight draws that I lost count, so I'm going to go ahead and bet big. I make it 1,500 chips to go. The big blind does in fact call, and the turn card comes the 8 of diamonds. Don't love this card as the front door flush obviously comes in, as well as some straight draws. So with the action checked over to me, I think it's going to be playing best as a check back here and evaluate the river, which I go ahead and do, and the river comes out a 3 of clubs. Once again, not the best river in the world. Some more straight draws come in. Honestly, not the best run out for my specific holding, but once again, when my opponent checks it over to me, we're set in between the spot of going for value or checking it back. Checking it back seems absolutely ridiculous, and getting bluffed here as a check raise is almost impossible. Level 1 or level 2 of the World Series of Poker, most people aren't doing this as a bluff, so I'm looking to get value, and I'm almost never worried about getting raised, because if I do, we have a pretty easy fold. After a little bit of thinking, I decide to go ahead and bet a little bit on the chunkier side. I make it 2,700 chips to go. My opponent thinks about it for a very, very long time. I'm expecting my opponent to have some kind of random middling pair, maybe top pair, decent kicker. But after a long wait, my opponent flicks in the call. That is wonderful news. This is literally the best possible way to get our World Series of Poker main event off to a hot start.
Parked out in the parking lot. Can you do that? Or he like lived in his RV in the real parking lot back in the day?
Pretty sure his vlog had him in bed the day after the selling out.
To this point, things have been going fairly swimmingly. A couple of raise and takes on my end, and the table is playing fairly face up. Don't have to put myself in a bunch of tough positions. We're going to just play the merit of our holding and our range, whatever the hell that means. Here's a great example when early position makes it 1.1k, nearly 4x here. Luckily, I'm in the big blind, so I'm already getting a pretty decent price to call, and even more so in the middle position, the late position, and the small blind all call, and I look down at Queen Jack of Diamonds. I flick in the call here. 3-bet would be a little bit on the, ridiculous size. We don't want to be blowing off our own equity. We flop top pair here, and a backdoor flush draw on the action checks through. Going off to a turn card that comes a 10 of hearts. I don't know if I love or hate this card, but I'll tell you this. I got top pair, and I saw a whole lot of checks on the flop. I go ahead and throw out a bit of a meaty bet here for 2,500 chips. Looking to get called here by all-in for your queens, as well as some middling pairs and some flush draws and straight draws that obviously exist. Luckily for us, we do get one customer. Late position calls, and we're going off to a river card that comes out the 4 of clubs. Once again, this shouldn't change a whole lot here. There is one straight draw that comes in, but again, that'd be quite the interesting call there with a flop with a gutter ball. I go ahead and throw out a bet of 3.2 thousand. Once again, small chance that we're behind here, but one thing I cannot do is allow one of my opponents here to get off scot-free and not have to deal with the bet. Looking to get, once again, calls here from weaker queens or middling pairs that won't believe me. And after a bit of thinking, luckily for me, my opponent makes a call. When he doesn't raise me, we're almost confident in our hand. I show it, and we are in fact good. Literally, things have gone about as good as it's ever going to get. Poker is easy when you're making pairs. Some time has passed. We've now chipped down to about 50,000 chips to start off this next hand, and the level has gone up to 500, 500, 300. It folds over to the middle position player, definitely a good thinking player who decides to raise to 1.2k. I'm in the big blind. I look down at a suited 8-4, good enough to defend. We're going off to a flop here where I end up with top pair. Luckily for me, it ends up checking through. I feel pretty confident in my holding. We're going off to a turn card here that's not my favorite one as it comes out the 10 of diamonds. I check it over to my opponent who bets 1,000 here. Once again, this would be absolutely Looney Tunes to fold. After a bit of thinking, I check it over to my opponent who goes for a pretty big pot size bet of 5,000. And this is the point where the hand gets a little interesting. I go deep into the tank. Again, not the best run out for my exact hand. We end up flopping top pair, and just like that, by the river, we end up with third pair. I think that this is probably going to be one of the worst hands I end up with on the river after it goes check, check, and then check, call. I don't see a lot of better made hands that I'll ever have here, or worse made hands that I'll have here. Maybe sometimes I decide to peel one off with a 6, but even, again, I'd probably be folding that on the turn if I'm being fair, so don't know how to really react to this, and after a bit of thinking, I just realized that I'll probably have better hands in this spot here, and I just decide to throw in the fold. Luckily for us, we were immediately greeted by Poker Face Ash at this point, who didn't see my opponent's hands, but it seems like she was pretty happy with my fold there, and the positive affirmation of my play is definitely going to make me feel better. Heading over to dinner break now, looking to get my mind back together.
That's what he told us in the class in 83. And he said
Yet another fun hand to go over. After starting off really hot, we have definitely cooled off. The blinds have gone up here, 600, 600, 300. I have a starting stack of about 45,000, so still too many chips to even count. The hijack makes it $2,000 to go. That is over 3x, and our hijack opponent is definitely someone that I can perceive to be a little bit on the tighter side. Going to be opening pretty solid hands. But when I look down at 5-6 of hearts, you know, you guys know how I am. Can't tempt me with a good time here and not expect me to continue to dance and tango with these suited connectors. I flick in the call, and so does the big blind. The flop comes out 9-7-6. We flop ourselves a gutter ball as well as bottom pair. At this point, our opponent c-bets for 2,000. We have a pretty easy call here with all of our equity. The big blind folds. And the turn card is an interesting one. Puts 4-liner out there, but it does improve me to bottom 2 pair. At this point, my opponent once again throws out a continuation bet for the same amount of 2,000. This is usually indicative of a marginal holding. Sometimes this is either a really cheap bluff or, you know, a hand like pocket aces, pocket kings, an overpair in general that doesn't know how to react to a board that's not getting better for their specific hand. In real time, I just decided to make the call here and allow my opponent to either bluff if he's still bluffing or take himself to value town. The river card comes out the king of diamonds. I don't love it, as there's a small chance my opponent can have a hand like pocket kings to beat me, but moreover, my opponent happens to have a hand like pocket queens, pocket jacks, pocket tens, less likely for them to call a bet, but all that's thrown out of the window when my opponent throws out a bet for 6,000. Yeah, this hand is getting very weird very fast. We clearly can never fold our hand here. Now the question is there any merit in raising? And I think to the answer to that question is probably no. There's a small chance my opponent has a hand like pocket eights, and outside of that, I don't think he's ever going to have an 8. But the next question becomes, do I ever think I can get called by hands like pocket aces, pocket queens, or pocket jacks? And I'm going to go ahead and say that's fairly unlikely. So I decided to just make the call here. It'd probably be a little too thin to go for value with the raise. We show our hand, and obviously we're going to be good here. A really positive sign of things here. Happy we won that pot. Today has been an absolute test of my mental fortitude. We went up immediately and then down fairly quickly. Now, once again, this ship is starting to stabilize a bit. The rocky waters are starting to settle, and we're here to make them more rocky, I guess. We look down at the old King 7 offsuit. The day's getting pretty late now. I go ahead and raise it up to 1,400 chips. I'm in the cutoff, so I guess that's what I have going for me, is that I'm slightly in late position against people that have not been looking to, you know, defend their blinds all that often. Person that I'm raising, whose big blind it is definitely a solid thinking player, who's probably the best player at the table, so I don't like raising hands this week. I'm definitely going to be getting into some trouble here if he just calls, but all for naught when my opponent makes a call and the big blind gets out of the way. We're going heads up out of position with a pretty junk hand, but with this junk hand, we end up with top pair. Well, if you make top pair, I think it'd be a little goofy to not bet such a pair sometimes. So, all right, it seems like a decent spot to throw out a small C bet. Actually, go ahead and down bet, going about a third of the size of the pot or slightly less. Don't think that I need to be going all that big here. This is already a really wet board texture. Getting raised here would be a disaster. If I bet bigger, I wouldn't even be able to continue. So, I make a 1.2k. My opponent loves it, makes a call. We're going off to a turn card that comes out the 3 of clubs. Once again, a pretty nice brick here. And I think we can continue with an easy check. Allowing my opponent to bluff with some of his hands sounds wonderful. And moreover, my hand can probably use some showdown at this point. My opponent doesn't like anything that I just said, and he bets out 4,000. Look, I don't love this spot here, but once again, I do have top pair. I'm slightly under-repped when I check this turn card, and once again, there's still a small chance that my opponent can actually be taking a stab with a bluff. I go ahead and make the call, and we're going off to a river card that comes out the deuce of spades. Well, this is kind of an annoying spot. We have obviously a spot to check. Leading here would be a disaster. Maybe sometimes a really tiny block bet would be fun, but no, not the best idea in the world probably. My opponent thinks about it for a bit before deciding to make a massive bet for 20,000 chips. If you guys are doing some quick maths here, that's over the size of the pot and fairly substantially. I am deep into the tank at this point, and I now feel a massive amount of regret for even raising such a shitty hand, because now I've put myself in a pretty crummy situation. My opponent is breathing fairly heavily. I'm looking to see if I can get any type of live reads. I can definitely see that my opponent is breathing very heavy. You know, as somebody says, this can be a false live tell, as some people do this with a really good hand and some people do this with a really bad hand. It's honestly not as black and white as we expect it to be. The problem now here is that I only have around 18,000 chips remaining if I make this call and I'm wrong. I don't love that, to be quite fair, but the one saving grace is that still is 30 big blinds in this spot. So there's so much to think about. I'm really perplexed here. And the question now becomes is what hands can just flat call the flop here that can go for 3 streets of value. Not a whole lot. I think Queen Jack is definitely a credible hand that can just call the flop and then go bet and then bomb the river, obviously, as it is a nuts. But after quite a bit of tanking and thinking, I'm just gonna go with my live read. I don't recommend doing this too often, but my opponent just doesn't seem comfortable with the situation. There's a couple of hands that my opponent can have that don't get there, like 7-8 suited is definitely a hand that can consider letting off here. And beyond that, maybe he has a hand that's blocking the straight, like Jack 10 or Queen 10. Those are hands that can maybe turn their middling pairs into a bluff here. So after a long pause, I flick in the call. I go with my live read, and my opponent shows 3-5. What the? Okay, we'll definitely take it here, ladies and gentlemen. I will take it. I mean, I can't fault him. I believe in playing my natural 9 and my natural 8, but definitely a sick bluff by him, and happy that we were able to pick him off. To this point, the session has been an absolute roller coaster of emotions. After getting that huge call in that last hand, we have now catapulted ourselves to a very sizable stack. Something that we can be proud to take over to day 2. Somewhere in the 75k, 80k chip situation. Definitely going to work for the following day of battles. On the last hand of note for day 1, we have another crazy spot. I look down at pocket 10s here for middle position. I make it 1.4k to go here, and then the button goes ahead and 3-bets to 4.5k. This is not the first time this thinking player from the button has done this to me today, but this is the first time that I'll be continuing. Now the question is, do we continue with the 4-bet or a 3-bet? Considering I'm in middle position, my opponent 3-bet here, I actually like 4-betting sometimes. I don't know what the GTO wizards will say, but I feel like when I'm going to be in middle to late position, facing a button 3-bet, they're definitely going to be doing this a little bit on the lighter side. It won't always be premiums, especially considering they're in position against a late position or middle position open. All that to be said, I just go ahead and make the call here. I don't want to get really crazy and lose a big pot here right before we end up in the bag, so I go ahead and make the call. We're going off to a flop here that comes out fairly favorable. 4-3-3, flopping an overpair with pocket 10s. Doesn't happen all that often, but you love it when you happen to do just that. I check it over to my opponent, who bets 3.5k. At this point, I consider raising against a really small c-bet like this. Our opponent's going to be c-betting a bunch of hands just all the time. Granted, he's going to have aces, kings, and queens as often as he will ace, king, and all that junk in c-bet here. So you can go either way, and obviously if I raise here, I'm just looking to take the pot down. Obviously, it's not ever a spot that we want to get called, but there is quite a bit of free money in the middle already. But again, I just make the call here, continuing to allow my opponent to bluff if he so desires to do so. We're going off to a turn card that comes out the Queen of Diamonds. Interesting card here as it brings a backdoor flush draw, but in these 3-bet, 4-bet pots, not too many flush draws should be expected to be had in my opponent's 3-betting range from the button. I check it over to my opponent, and this time he sizes up a little bit, betting 11,000. The only hands that he should have here that improve are going to be King, Queen, and Ace, Queen. Outside of that, a lot of his hands are just going to be continuing to barrel that pick up flush draws that are like ace king of diamonds, ace 10 of diamonds, ace 5 of diamonds, ace jack of diamonds. All those ace x of diamonds hands are definitely going to start picking up the chance to barrel off here. So I go ahead and decide to make the call. We're going off to a river card here that comes out the 7 of diamonds. Once again, I check it over to my opponent, who doesn't waste too much time before deciding to go all in for 34k. Well, if you're doing quick maths, once again, we have another big pot size bet. I'm a little frustrated here as we've ended up in a river in a spot where we didn't want to have to put a lot of money in the middle, and somehow all of the money has gone in the middle. I think in hindsight, which is always 2020, with how this hand has played out, every single one of the draws that I expected my opponent to have gets there. If he was getting really creative with a hand like 5-6 suited, he got there in the river by virtue of his straight. If he happened to have a hand like ace 5 of diamonds or ace x of diamonds for that matter, he now improves to the nut flush. And if he happened to have a hand like ace queen or ace or king queen, honestly, I don't think he should ever be going for value here. So now the question becomes, what the hell do I do? Is he ever doing this with the naked ace of diamonds? I don't know how you get here on this river with the naked ace of diamonds. Is he ever doing this with anything that doesn't have a flush in his hand? I don't know, honestly. But once again, I think about it for a really long time. And in the last hand, I made the biggest hero call of the day that I could. And like I tell myself before every session, every single poker session, you're going to be required to make a really big hero call and a really big hero fold. Well, is this even constituted to be a hero fold? I don't even know. I don't think so. It's not even that big of a spot. But after quite a bit of thinking, I end up flicking in the call. Our opponent shows ace queen, so goes really thin there on the river, but how can you blame him? Unfortunate spot for me there, a little bit frustrating, but hey, just as easy as the money comes, it goes.
So, walking to the car, I finally found a bag in the World Series of Poker. Granted, it's less than starting stack, but if there's ever a tournament to bag less than starting stack, it's this one. Up and down day, you guys saw from the hands. Had a big hero call, that was right. Had a big hero call, that was wrong. Emotions were really low at the end of the session. I ended up picking up, in the last orbit, there was 5 hands to play. Picked up ace king on the button, looked like a clear steal spot. I raised, get 2 folds from the blinds, that sucked. Very next hand, pick up king queen off. I raised to 1400, the guy on my left just makes it 6,000. And I just didn't want to commit that much of my stack. You know, 4-bet bluffing is an option, but just didn't feel comfortable doing it. So I just said, screw it. I pitched the cards into the muck, and then a whole debacle just happened. And let's go to the car because it's really hot, so we should talk in the car. We were supposed to deal 5 hands, that's what the floor announced. That's what happens. And then one player to my left starts telling the staff, the dealer specifically, that we only dealt 4 hands. We clearly dealt 5 hands already, but he kept saying 4. He ended up getting one person to agree with him. Everyone else at the table disagreed, but it doesn't matter how many people, it's about who's the loudest. And the 2 gentlemen that were saying that there was only 4 hands were definitely the loudest. So after all of that, we ended up getting dealt a 6th hand, which is a ghost hand. Don't want to bust on this hand as this is not a real hand, but whatever. Everyone's obviously folding. They don't want to play their cards. I looked on a king 3 suited. I realized that nobody wants to play these cards, and stealing some blinds here is probably really powerful at this point to go into day 2 with morale and just obviously getting more chips. I raised to 1400. Dude on my left, I was berating the dealer to get the next hand, ends up calling. We're going heads up to a flop. Flop is like king, queen, brick. We flop top pair or something like that. I see bet really small for 1,000, he calls. Turn is another random break, like a 7 of diamonds, I think. I check, he checks back. I know clear that I have the best hand now. Now it's all about getting value. River comes out, another brick. I just bet out for like 3K or 2,500 or something like that. I don't even remember. And the guy tank calls. We show and we're good. We'll take it. So now we're sitting on like 30K or something, which is half starting. I'm not proud of it. But hey, I get to leave today on a good note, and that's kind of a big deal for me, I think. Get a day off tomorrow, gonna enjoy going to the summer league, and yeah, you guys won't see much of that. Next time you'll see me, we'll be in this same video, but for day 2. So let's fast forward like 48 hours. How about that? Mic should be on. Mic on? I'm good. I'm all clear. 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 Damn, I gotta be careful. I'm like rubbing my neck on the mic. I was thinking about wearing glasses today. Decided not to. Felt like that's not me. But I'll wear a hoodie because it gets cold in there. How many chips do you think this guy got? Stop, top, bitch, stop playing with me. Stop playing with me. Stop, top, bitch, stop playing with me.
The fascination of day 2 is one that I can never describe to anyone that's not played the World Series of Poker main event. The buzz from day 1 and the hope from day 1 is almost multiplied to a level that you don't expect. We're still several hours from making the money, several days from making the money for that matter, and you can't help but feel hope. Granted, I don't have a lot of chips here to blast off or to go to battle with, but luckily for us, day 2 starts off on the positive foot. A little bit of 3-betting, a little bit of 4-betting, and just like that, we have ourselves somewhere around half starting stack. I'll definitely take it, especially after a really rough start, but here we are in another fun hand. Going to be a little tough to go over this hand here as it is in hindsight, and as you always know, hindsight is not as 20/20 as you expect, but I do have pocket 8s. I don't remember the blind level, but I go ahead and raise, probably a min click. And my opponent from the cutoff decides to make the call. We're going off to a flop here that comes out 6-3 deuce. We flop an overpair. I go ahead and make a c-bet here. There are 2 clubs out there. I do in fact have the 8 of clubs. I throw out a small c-bet to which my opponent makes the call. The turn card is not my favorite card. It comes out the king of spades. Sure, I can still go for a little bit of value and equity denial against hands that contain those flush draws, so I decided to do just that. Let's go for another small bet. I decided to throw out the small bet of 3,200. Again, this will be somewhere in the neighborhood of a third the size of the pot, looking to equity deny against hands that have 2 overs, but once again, maybe a little bit too much on the hopefulness here. I think our hand probably plays best as a check call or even check fold if, you know, the price isn't right. But after all that, my opponent decides to make the call. We're going off to a river card. That is, yeah, another brick. I check it over to my opponent this time here as we do not want to be put in a tough spot. And my opponent does exactly what I didn't want to see. He bets out about 17,000 chips. Once again, this isn't all of my chips, but it's enough to leave me in a little bit of cause for pause. As you guys can see, it'll leave me with not many chips behind. I'm counting my chips out, trying to figure out how many big blinds I will have after this call. There's not a whole lot that ends up getting there on the river. Only a hand like, I don't know, king queen with the king queen of clubs or king x of clubs is now beating me that I think can still go for proper value. Outside of that, a lot of hands that contain the naked ace of clubs or, you know, 2 clubs, the ace x of clubs, ace high flush draws are definitely still going to be there. So after a really long tank here and going around trying to figure out what the heck the best thing to do is here, I don't love it, but I'll be leaving myself with about 15,000 chips behind, which it will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 big blinds. I decide to flick in the hero call and we get shown pocket aces. Oh my god, did not expect to see that. My opponent played me down to a fiddle. Really unfortunate situation there. Our opponent does not 3-bet pre-flop. Our opponent does not raise the flop or the turn, and we get put in the absolute blender. Really well played by him, and that's one way to lose a maximum from us. Sitting on around 15,000 chips, we've got some work to do. At this point, that's good for about 15 big blinds, and we have an under the gun raise to 2,500 chips. There are 2 callers, and then the action gets over to me, in the big blind. I look down at ace queen of clubs. Again, a really interesting spot here. We only have about 15-ish big blinds, somewhere in that neighborhood. And after a bit of thinking, I realized that it's probably going to be best for me to just put all my money in the middle here. There's so much dead money to be had. Even if I don't get a call here, I nearly double up my stack, so I just go for it. I go all in. The under the gun player, who is a bracelet winner, she decides to make the call. Everyone else folds, and we're heads up against ace king. A disaster. This entire tournament is coming down to the parking lot hand. Will it put us in the parking lot? What's going to happen? It's not looking good here. The flop comes out, not giving me any equity whatsoever. None of us have a pair. The turn card, once again, is another low card. We are now down to just 3 outs to continue our run here at the World Series of Poker main event. And the river card comes out a jack. We do not better our hand. Her ace high is better than my ace high. And just like that, the dream comes to a crumbling end. The beginning of the end. A really, really rough way to put an exclamation point on what has been a really rough summer and a really dark place in poker for me. It definitely feels like the beginning to the end.
The emotions changed so drastically. The hope, the chip in the chair attitude. Tournaments are very funny, and then you just get instantly tilted. And yeah, busting the main is never fun. It's no one likes it. Now all I want to do is go back home. The other home, not this home. Well, that will officially wrap up World Series of Poker 2023 for me. Finito. Buck. Thank you guys for watching. Yeah.
I can do this with my eyes closed. It's too easy. It's too easy. I can do this with my eyes closed. It's too easy. It's too easy. I can do this with my eyes closed. I can do this with my eyes closed.